Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Technology, Media, and Telecom at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about FAST, free ad-supported television. And to discuss that, I've got returning guests, Mikhail Shandakis and Seth Schaefer with me. Welcome back to the podcast to you both.
Thank you, Eric. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us again.
Well, it's great to have you back, and we're in the midst of, I guess, a bit more than the usual media turmoil of late with everything that's been going on in the markets. But why don't we start talking about how you define free ad-supported television? I mean, it seems like that's the traditional way in which you've been thinking about how media got delivered back in the day, but it's happening now in a market that's a little different.
It's a good place to start, and it's sort of a collision of acronyms and terms we use and things like that. So, obviously, a big trend, sort of fast, free ad-supported television. See lots of headlines about that in the TMT sector. Really, we try to draw kind of a line between, and it sounds silly to say traditional AVOD or traditional ad-supported online video. But that's kind of where we are. So when we talk about traditional kind of AVOD, that's more like YouTube, sort of go to a service, watch a TV show, watch user-generated content, watch a movie, see ads periodically. It's up to the user to sort of know where they're going or land on a page and navigate their way around and find things. When we talk about FAST, we're kind of carving out like a new breed of service. So the FAST services, the big ones in the US, like Pluto TV, Tubi, Freevee, Roku Channel, they've really taken off because they offer that traditional AVOD experience where you can browse around and find thousands and thousands of movies and TV shows to watch. But then you can also sort of tap into what's more kind of traditional TV experience, where you have a programming guide, you have programs that are showing on different channels where it's running. You can browse through channels, you can click something to watch, and you're watching it kind of in real time as that programming unfolds for you. So that's kind of how we define FAST. Like, it has to have that channel component as well as the on-demand component. So I'm getting in the weeds, but we always, a lot of times it's difficult. We have to set our parameters at the beginning. So things like YouTube, really for this conversation, even though it's free and it's quote unquote TV, we don't really see YouTube as a FAST platform, whereas a Tubi or a Pluto TV, that's really kind of the world that we're talking about here with FAST.
Man, we are back into all of those typical cycles of tech, which, the idea of thinking about YouTube as the legacy technology and FAST starting to displace it. Yeah, hey, the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, right?
Yeah, it's exploding universe theory. Everything explodes and contracts and explodes again and contracts. So I don't know where we are in that phase. But, I think behind it, the interesting angle with FAST is it's less dominated. When we look at SVOD kind of streaming video, we really see Netflix, Disney dominating. We have the big US media companies have planted their flags there. Even when we go globally, and look at international markets, those big media companies for subscription streaming video control 60, 70, 80% of market share in a lot of markets. The interesting thing about FAST is we don't really have those incumbents like that. So it's a more wide open race. It's more local broadcasters, kind of media owners in international markets can compete more easily because of the local content they can tap into. So I won't say that Michael and I both cover FAST as well as subscription video. SVOD is a little bit of a mature market. FAST is a little more wide open. We're sort of seeing it evolve more in real time with a lot of jostling around and, a lot of more entries in the market right now.
And Mikhail, do you have thoughts on sort of where that fits? Because you take a look at primarily European markets. How is that differing in what you're seeing?
Yeah, so the situation in Europe is a bit different compared to the US. In terms of revenue, I would say the European market is less than a tenth of the US. We only have like a handful of pure FAST platforms operating across Europe, such as Pluto TV, Samsung TV Plus, LG channels, and a few others. These platforms have, of course, limited reach And the second reason that FAST in Europe is quite limited at this stage is that free-to-air linear TV is still doing well. Consumers in most markets would rather watch their local news or their local talk shows compared to streaming a fast channel that's playing old Baywatch episodes 24/7.
Limited appeal on that side, but well, I guess that sort of gets back into the point, Seth, that you're making. There is still this strong demand for regional content, and a lot of that gets driven by what those viewership populations look like. What are their personas, and what are their viewing preferences?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think it's an interesting model as well because fast, when you get outside of the traditional TV world in which you have an idea for a network, you get funding, you secure programming, there's all of these built-in costs to launching traditional kind of TV network, whether that's in the US or Europe or wherever. And so always in the back of your mind, does it have mass appeal of some sort? Not that you can't have specialty programming, but you're basically having to guarantee you can reach X number of people in Y years to make money and make all this work. With Fast, I mean, the Baywatch, it's funny, the example, but that's been a unique wrinkle that Fast added because there's not really the same cost in launching a Fast channel. So for either a platform owner or a content owner, when they're looking to launch these fast channels, it's pretty quick, easy to do, very little cost involved. So there's a lot of experimentation around what kind of programming works. And to Michael's point and your point, it's not going to be the same recipe around the world. So what works in the U.S. may not work in Europe and may not work in APAC and things like that. But it's definitely interesting that there's kind of room for single IP is what we're calling that. So an entire channel for Baywatch, an entire channel for Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, an entire channel for Painting with Bob Ross, as well as the ability to compile things and around genres. You can have a Pluto TV drama channel where you just get all dramas. You can, some networks are moving towards basically sort of repackaging their linear network content into a fast offering and things like that. So there's a lot of different things going on. Some of the services, Roku Channel just announced a deal for bringing live sports programming for the first time to Roku Channel. So they're partnering with Paramount to bring Formula E electric car racing to the platform. So, it's like we've seen sort of with the world of SVOD, even that programming like news and sports that seemed like it would stay kind of in the US at least in the pay TV world. Some of these fast platforms are dabbling in a lot of different areas. And really the goal is where we started of finding that mix. It's one thing to get someone to try out this channel for the first time, but to really make money and to kind of move the needle for these media owners and platform operators, it needs to not be someone who checks it out for a novelty and watches for half an hour and never comes back. They're trying to build up these engaged audiences that work in these fast platforms. They watch 10, 15, 20 hours a month at these platforms, which kind of makes it all work as far as the ad revenue making it worthwhile.
Well, and it sounds like that you wind up then getting in a situation in which, given that it's still relatively early, that experimentation is really a big part of trying to figure out how you really start to build a market, how you actually retain those users. If in fact, dedicated channels have only nominal cost to pick up, hey, if it turns out that there's a large population that's really interested in those friendly little clouds and oil painting, hey, maybe that's a draw, right?
It's an interesting thing too because we look across these platforms and we're talking about the big ones that Michael and I have mentioned, but in the US at least there's 20 plus different platforms and they're all looking for ways to differentiate. Obviously content's a big one. But we're seeing kind of an interesting trend sort of early on in the market. It was sort of a race. The prestige number was how many channels you had. That was how they were trying to draw people in with, oh, come over to our service. We have 200 channels. Come over here. We have 300 channels. And we've actually seen that get dialed back a little bit recently. So some of the platforms are trimming their channel counts, and they're sort of recognizing that that is a marketing thing to hang your hat on. But at the end of the day, are they just repeating kind of some of the complaints about the traditional pay TV package of I'm paying for 200 channels and I watch 4 of them. That's not a satisfying experience for a lot of consumers.
It's the old cable story of 57 channels and nothing on, right?
Yeah, and essentially for the viewer, the experience is similar to browsing through the EPG of your multi-channel subscription. You don't get the recommendations you get when you're watching Netflix, for example.
That's an interesting point. In the fact that you have this huge catalog, and yet one of the challenges to enhanced viewership is being able to find it all.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, the benefits are for the advertiser. The benefits of targeting the viewer compared to linear TV.
If you can quantify what the value is of that Baywatch, dedicated viewership, that actually raises an interesting point, which is that it does mean that you've got the option of pretty narrow targeting if you focus your content that way. And if it turns out that you've got advertisers of lifeguard supplies, maybe the Baywatch channel is the perfect medium for them. I guess actually, do you see that level of specificity there, or is that still an aspect of the market that has yet to develop?
I like that we're turning this into the Baywatch episode. I'm not sure what media company owns the rights to Baywatch. I think they owe us something for this, but the targeting aspect of it, Michael's spot on there. When we talk about the shift of video content to digital platforms, whatever they are, whether we're talking about Netflix getting into advertising, this and that, really that's what advertisers are after, is just being able to target across any sort of way they want to target, whether it's, I think possibly your lifeguard example is a little too narrow. Like, I'm not sure there's enough advertisers.
Not a fully developed market segment yet, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit tricky, but generally speaking, that's where these advertising markets are headed, with the hopes that you reach audiences to being able to buy specific audience, specific channels, things like that. It is still fragmented, though, so that's the challenge. We heard this early on with digital advertising in general, in that advertisers don't want to have to go to this platform and reach X number of people and then go to another platform and do a buy there and go to a third platform and do a buy there. So when we talk about, in the US, just using round numbers, the big fast platforms in the US are still reaching around 15, 20 million viewers every month, in total. So when your total pie is only, I say only, it's a big audience, but compared to the reach of a YouTube, compared to the reach of even pay TV in some situations, that's not the biggest pool to dip into. So it's still early, I think, to really target around individual kind of audiences the way we're talking about, but that's definitely the long-term appeal. And part of it, this is a whole discussion on its own, but part of what's making the fast model work is that these platforms are able to get pretty decent CPMs when they go to advertisers. So they're able to monetize their inventory pretty well, and that's giving them money to kind of put back into content. So that virtuous cycle of, in the past, one of the problems with free ad-supported video platforms was that the CPMs just weren't that high. So it became kind of this dusty window that you could monetize your video content in. You wouldn't get much for it, but you would get something. So these platforms are kind of the home for really old, dated TV series and movies, that no one was super excited about watching. That's changing a little bit. So the CPMs are better. A lot of viewers are watching on connected TVs. The platforms get pretty good rates for the ad inventory. So it opens up some possibilities there.
Is that something where that starts to lead to better content creation in these channels? Are they still trying to manage to get their head above water until they start to do that? I mean, right now, we seem to be in this period in which content creation, especially now in the States with the writer's strike, there's a lot of thought about what's going to happen with content. There are a lot of streamers that are starting to pull back in terms of how they're spending on content creation. That part of the market seems to be a little unsettled.
It's a really good point. And there's been more announcements of original programming coming from the fast platforms. And some people within the industry are starting to question, again, this cycle of repeating the mistakes that you just made, like in the pay TV, traditional linear TV world, of Are we suddenly going to see these media companies over investing in original content for these fast platforms? Is a fast platform ever going to be the conduit for something like Game of Thrones, with the budget thrown at that? And I don't think, again, just my 2 cents, who am I? But it seems like the media companies are in belt tightening mode now. So I would be really surprised that they would suddenly all overspend and suddenly start investing billions of dollars in dramas, high profile, tentpole sort of things for the fast services. But I do think, especially for the major media owners that have a fast platform. So in the US, we're really talking about Paramount with Pluto TV, Fox with Tubi. Um, they can kind of draw on IP, from other parts of obviously their business. So the trend seems to be for improved content on these fast channels because they're able to sort of monetize at a relatively good rate. But I don't think it'll ever get to the point that we saw with sort of the streaming wars on the subscription video side, with everyone pulling back into walled gardens and investing billions and billions. And, now we seem to be kind of unwinding that for some of them, just sort of admitting that really for a big media company, the older model of, having your own service, monetizing through that service, sort of serving your super fans, but then also licensing some content to streaming rivals like Netflix and Amazon, being able to window that content through your free ad supported platforms and things like that. That seems to be where we're headed, back to a world where content isn't sort of siloed off, walled off as much.
You've got different avenues and different paths. Yeah.
And just to add to what Seth said, like fast revenues in Europe, according to our estimates, is around 2 to 3% of the SVOD revenues. So unless that figure goes up significantly, yeah, I would agree that they wouldn't throw in money at the moment or anytime soon into originals.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, so still a very small percentage. Interesting. Huh. Yeah, because that means that in terms of both how they're able to compete for content, what their capability is to be able to source that from an original perspective is certainly a little more challenging, I guess, shall we say.
Exactly.
Well, Seth, you'd mentioned sports. And if you think about things that are coming out of the linear realm, is this an area where you see that potentially becoming a bigger part of FAST? I mean, especially with, again, talk about another market that's in upheaval, the regional sports networks and all the craziness that's going on there. Is that an angle, or do you see focus there, or is that something that's still way too far out?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen, I feel like I'm talking about the same services, but, it's sort of applicable. The fast platforms in the US with corporate owners that have media rights in sports, primarily, again, Paramount with Pluto and Fox with Tubi, they've been really judicious. Paramount has moved, obviously, some of its sports rights to Paramount Plus. That's a big draw of that subscription service. But they've been pretty judicious about what they bring to the fast platforms. So what you do see, though, on the fast platforms is a lot of, obviously not mainstream sports. So the big sports, the major sports, that are tied up in these long-term, really lucrative sports rights deals that primarily go to linear television. I don't see a path for that really moving to the fast platforms anytime soon. But you do see a lot of, again, like pickleball, things like that. These sports around the fringes that don't necessarily command the same ability to get these lucrative pay TV deals. There's a lot of programming like that that's moved to the fast channels really quickly.
Well, you mentioned E1, and that's, hey, here you've got basically a new sport whose rights haven't been locked up. That I guess that's an avenue for.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, I think, when, especially with a Roku, they've sort of moved in a model to kind of building content hubs where they can. So they can't tap into the same sort of IP that the Paramount or Warner Brothers or Disney can, but they can, with sort of the device angle. They have devices in a lot of homes in the US and around the world now, and being able to build kind of content areas. I think an important part of this that is sort of implied for me because I live in this data But really, we're talking about supplementing what consumers are already doing and watching when it comes to video. There's very few households out there, I think, that are entirely replacing linear TV and subscription video with a fast service. And it's really borne out in our survey data. It's a lot of the respondents when we go out and survey who's using these fast platforms. In a lot of cases, they're actually pay TV subscribers. They have a lot of streaming video services. They're really kind of omnivores who like to watch a lot of stuff, and they're savvy enough to figure out where to go get it. And so if that's Formula E at Roku channel, they build that into kind of their slate of places that they go to for video content. So, I think, with sports, long-winded way of answering your question, but I think fast is an interesting avenue there because it's a quick way to get programming out. It's amenable to content owners and leagues that may not have the same clout. And it can really be customized. So what Michael's going to see in the fast on his side could look a little more European as far as, a mix of sports than what might flow to sort of the fast platforms in the US and APAC and other regions as well.
So something that you can particularly target, again, given that nominal cost of kicking up another channel. Where do you see this going long term? It sounds like this is one of many, not necessarily going to dominate or displace, or becoming a key part of the entire entertainment package that individual viewers are consuming.
Yeah, I think, Michael's talked about kind of the revenue comparison there, Europe versus US. Another important point here is just to remember that we're talking about the future, and definitely, I think we see fast growing. Like, obviously, it's kind of having its moment now. But our last for the U.S., our revenue projections were close to $4 billion in ad revenues for the major fast platforms in 2022. Pluto TV is already generating over $1 billion a year in ad revenue. So, it's setting kind of the stage. These aren't far off things that may develop in 5 years and be significant revenues. Like, we're kind of already there as far as generating billions in revenues in the U.S. But I think long term, if the pandemic has taught me anything, it's to be careful about making bold predictions about where things are going as far as market sizes and stuff. But obviously, just speaking for the U.S., Michael can kind of chime in for Europe after I'm done. But, for the U.S., pay TV obviously is in decline. That's everywhere. We see that, cord cutting. But it's still a big business. Our projections at Kagan for the end of 2023, still 56 million pay TV households in the U.S. So that's more than half where it was 10 years ago, but that's still a big number. So for the U.S., still growth for fast. We're probably past the explosive early day. Industry revenue's growing 100, 150% year over year. But obviously, I think an important window to kind of sit beside pay TV as a channel for content owners, network owners to monetize, fast, SVOD, all of these kind of finding their own place in the ecosystem. What do you think, Michael? Your take on Europe? As big an impact, less?
Yeah, well, cord cutting in Europe is not really having an impact. I would say pay TV subscribers have been relatively stable over the last few years. And that's one of the reasons that we see fast operators starting to partner with pay TV providers, and Pluto TV is one recent example, who recently did a deal with Magenta TV in Germany and Virgin in the UK. So now pay TV subscribers of Magenta TV and Virgin can have direct access to Pluto TV.
Oh, interesting. So it actually gets bundled in as part of one more piece of the pay TV puzzle. Interesting.
Exactly. And that's something SVOD providers have been doing since 2016, essentially.
You're making the point that it's this question of, from a viewer perspective, how do you find all of these various choices? How do you become aware of them? But hey, if the fast offerings get bundled in with the pay TV offerings, maybe over time, those folks who are really focused on the Bob Ross channel start to sort of say, well, I don't have to pay for the full bundle. I can just get Bob Ross in the fast package. Who knows? Maybe that's an entree in certain markets.
It's an interesting point. Yeah. I mean, in the US market, the pay TV market, we've seen the big operators look for various, I won't say off ramps, but, how do they acknowledge trends and still maintain, revenues. And for the Comcast and Charters of the world, really more and more, it's been hanging on to broadband subscribers, finding ways to keep people in your ecosystem. So they may drop out of your video product and cut the video cord. But the important thing is, can you keep them on the broadband side, and then increasingly for those two operators as well, it's can you sell them mobile phone service as well? So that world, like Michael mentioned, the pay TV world's trying to pivot as well and, keep people in the ecosystem. And fast channels are an obvious way. I think part of the competitive capitalist side of us looks at that and says, why are you partnering with someone trying to disrupt your entire model, But I think the reality that you mentioned is that it's being flexible, and video is actually a pretty low margin product for these sort of diversified operators that do video and broadband and now wireless. So, I think that makes sense. And we're even seeing in the US with some of the virtual multi-channel services. So YouTube TV, Fubo, this new breed of pay TV that's all delivered virtually, that gives you a channel package. They're also, directly incorporating fast channels into their pay networks, that you get with these as well. So, like Michael mentioned, it's not only happening kind of on a set-top box level of, these things being available alongside stuff, but it's actually being woven into existing, network programming guides for some of the virtual multi-channel services too.
That same old challenge to manage churn, to be able to hang on to viewers, to be able to get towards this newfangled thing people have talked about called profitability, and actually try and move these businesses forward. Well, it's an interesting place to be.
And you mentioned the profitability word, not to go on too far with that, but it, again, and all of the excitement over fast, I think I said at the beginning, I'm by far not going to be a fast bear, but I think it's important to sprinkle in a little bearishness with all of the bullishness around fast. But these services are not wildly profitable. We've talked about success and kind of ramping up and growing audience and obviously spreading around the world and expanding. And exact numbers are hard to come by. So not saying that they're unprofitable. The big services are probably close to profitability and could be profitable if they wanted to decrease spend and be profitable, but these are not spinning off huge amounts of free cash flow, and really boosting kind of overall efforts of these media companies. They're still very much in sort of invest, grow out these fast platforms for the future.
The content may not be expensive, but yet you've still got infrastructure to run. And now we're in a situation in which, who knew, markets are actually worried about making money. Surprise, surprise.
That's the amazing one Michael and I talk about a lot casually, of just how things change so quickly. The pendulum swings really quickly kind of in the media space between where we were 18 months ago even, and bold plans of all of these major media owners challenging Netflix globally for forever and investing all these billions to suddenly, Warner Brothers and Disney just mothballing content entirely. It just disappeared. Not cutting back on investing in new content, but completely pulling programming from their streaming libraries, to sort of I won't say balance the books, but to sort of present,
Yeah, to be able to get to a point at which, that content that's not making me money, I'm not going to keep paying for it.
Yeah.
Crazy times. Well, this has been great. Thanks to both of you. I appreciate all the perspectives. And I guess we'll have to see where this all shakes out.
Thanks for having me. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Eric. It's always fun to sort of chat casually about these things instead of staring at spreadsheets. So thank you very much.
And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Carolyn Wright and Ethan Zimmern on the marketing and events teams, and our agency partner, the 199. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we'll be discussing attitudes about AI. We'll be taking a look back at some longitudinal data about how expectations and thoughts about AI have changed over time, especially now with all the speaking craziness that's going on with AI currently. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.